Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Han Da-eun in Seoul. South Korea marked the country's Armed Forces Day amid heightened inter-Korean tensions. President Yoon Suk-yeol used the occasion to warn Pyongyang that any attempt to use nuclear weapons would be met with overwhelming response from the South Korea-U.S. allied forces, resulting in an end of the Kim Jong-un regime. In a show of force, a U.S. B-1B bomber flew overhead while the formidable Hyunmoo-5 missile was publicly unveiled for the first time. North Korea was quick to react, warning of corresponding measures. Meanwhile, global debate was reignited over North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons, spurred by controversial statements from high-profile figures. For some expert insights into these developments and more, we're joined by our regular commentator, Dr. Myong-hyun. It's always great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
And also with us here in the studio tonight is NK News correspondent Shreyas Reddy. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Dr. Go, let's kick things off with you. So North Korea slammed the deployment of the B-1B bomber, also dubbed the Death Swan, saying it'll take corresponding measures. How big of a threat is this to Pyongyang and also the formidable Hyunmoo-5 missile that was unveiled for the first time?
Well, the B-1B bomber is essentially a strategic bomber of the United States, but then at the same time, I think that the United States want to send a very calibrated message to North Korea because B-1B bomber, even though we call it strategic bomber, is implying they can carry a nuclear weapon, but in fact it cannot. But it has a stealth qualities which makes it very difficult for the North Korean air defenses to detect intrusion by such a bomber. So essentially, the United States is sending a message to North Korea that even though it might not employ a surprise nuclear attack against North Korea, it can surprise the regime anytime the United States wants, because North Korea will have very difficult time detecting such a bomber. But I think what represents more of a threat to North Korea is it's actually a South Korean the weapon that it was just unveiled, the Hyunmoo-5. In fact, this is a very sophisticated latest model of the Hyunmoo series of ballistic missiles being developed by South Korea. South Korea essentially kicked into high gear the development of ballistic missiles after the United States and South Korea agreed to dismantle the so-called missile agreement, which had limited the range of South Korean missiles. This missile potentially can actually fly more than 3,000 kilometers, making it in fact a strategic weapon, or in the classification usually used to classify missiles according to the range. It could be called an intermediate range ballistic missile. So if South Korea, in fact, there's a trade-off between the size of the warhead and the range. So if the range is shorter, that means the missile can carry a heavier payload. So if South Korea limits drastically the payload, the range, then it can carry a much heavier warhead. So theoretically speaking, it's been actually leaked to the press that Hyunmoo-5, which was just unveiled yesterday, can carry up to 8 tons of payload, which makes it a very powerful weapon. In fact, if it's launched at the vertical way and then lives at the range of 300 kilometers, then the kinetic power of such a missile, falling vertically from sky, can reach a speed of Mach 10. So you multiply mass by speed, it means that it can potentially penetrate up to more than 80 meters of underground bunkers. So essentially, it's a bunker buster. So it makes a very powerful weapon, and it represents a very serious critical threat to Kim Jong-un, because we know that in case of contingency, Kim Jong-un tends to hide in very deep underground bunkers. But then this kind of defensive measures cannot protect him anymore if South Korea employs Hyunmoo-5.
Well, no wonder it's called the monster Hyunmoo missile. North Korea floated over 150 trash-filled balloons yet again, but it probably would not be the corresponding measure that it talked about. But what we know for sure that it's likely to ramp up provocations in the lead up to as well as after the U.S. presidential election. Now, coinciding with the Armed Forces Day, South Korea also launched a new strategic command aimed at deterring North Korea's weapons of mass destruction. Tell us more about this and what it means for North Korea.
Yeah, so this is a fairly an initiative that's been in the works for a long time, pretty much throughout President Yoon's tenure. It's been over 2 years. They've been talking about it, they've been working towards it, and effectively What this does is it brings together, it unifies different kinds of weapon systems that are integral to South Korea's three-axis system for deterring North Korean threats. And the idea is to be able to respond to a North Korean attack, not just after it happens, but even to be able to preempt it, to be able to ensure that it does not come to pass. And so this will bring together different systems like missiles, submarines, fighter jets, and the idea is to also potentially incorporate space capabilities, cyber capabilities in the future as it evolves, as the threats evolve, so too does the response. And to some extent this is also fairly similar to the U.S. Strategic Command, and the two will also get to work together, but at the same time, South Korea will also operate its own independent assets. And obviously, the big focus here is North Korea's threats, and essentially, this helps to, the idea that the government has is to remind North Korea that South Korea is more than capable of tackling its threat, more than capable of deterring its threat, and has the means to do so, and to streamline the response against that, while at the same time, in some ways, the combination of the parade, the strategic command, and the messages we've seen from the government in the last couple of days have been about also reminding the South Korean public that Seoul is ready to defend them when needed.
So in short, it's an overarching organ that integrates South Korea's key military weapons, and it's a reminder to North Korea that South Korea can respond overwhelmingly. Now, we have a big meeting coming up. North Korea is expected to hold the Supreme People's Assembly next Monday. Now, the big question is whether it'll revise its constitution to formally adopt its two-state approach and abandon its long-standing unification goals with the South. What's your analysis?
So clearly, this gathering is being planned so that the North Korea can ratify the new constitutional amendments. And so hints that was given out by the North Korean regime so far has been that essentially North Korea will implement this change or their doctrine, unification doctrine, which is now no longer about unification between the Koreas. That essentially North Korea is going to announce that two Koreas are totally separate entities, which in flagrant denial of the long-standing North Korean political doctrine that essentially North Korea's mission as a country was to unify with South. So, but it was described more like a doctrinal change. But now we might finally see implementation of this doctrinal change in more detailed policy measures. So in the constitutional amendment, it's likely that North Korea is going to announce that South Korea is essentially the enemy number one of North Korea. So they are going to take out of the constitution a text that refers to South Korea as a country that the North Korea should unify with. So any mention of independent, peaceful unification with the South will be eliminated from the constitution and replaced with something more antagonistic and much more aggressive, which essentially makes South Korea an enemy state. So, and then the other clauses that could be added to the constitution could be the explanation about the new territorial demarcations, because if North Korea is essentially going to declare that unification is out of its mission, historical mission, then it means that the North Korea will have to demark new frontiers with the South. I think that's something that's going to come up. But overall, I think this is something that it in fact reflects the overall North Korean strategic thinking right now. So even though the idea or the description of constitutional change carries a lot of weight, in fact, North Korea, constitution is only subordinate what Kim Jong-un says, who is the supreme leader of the country. And I think Kim Jong-un is using this device for constitutional amendment in order to add credibility to a message that North Korea has been sending since last year, which is that North Korea is capable and also going to use nuclear weapons against the South. I think in the North Korean mindset, the credibility of North Korea, which is capable of using nuclear weapons, was undermined by the fact that their constitution was assuming that they are always going to pursue a peaceful unification with South Korea. So in order to make the threat of a nuclear employment much more credible, they are essentially changing their constitution. So in that sense, I think this is probably part of their diplomatic offensive time with the presidential elections in the United States. So at the end of the day, North Korea wants to present itself as a very threatening, credible nuclear state to the United States, so the United States will acknowledge North Korea as such. So in order to go there, they need to take this step, political step of amending their constitution to enforce their discredibility.
Now, as Dr. Ko pointed out, another focal point of the assembly is demarcation of new frontiers. How would North Korea redraw the northern limit line, or the NLL, the de facto inter-Korean maritime border, to its advantage? What changes are expected on that front?
Well, to some extent, North Korea has never really accepted the northern limit line as it was laid out after the Korean War. They claim that it was drawn by the US-led UN command. And so to them, that's something that was unacceptable. So they always draw it a little south of the northern limit line to begin with. But now, as far as they're concerned, as Dr. Go pointed out, unification is off the table. It's time to firmly establish a boundary that is acceptable to them, that they think defines the limits of their territory. And so Kim Jong-un already pledged earlier this year in January that they would look to redraw the boundaries. And if, in their view, South Korea crossed this new boundary by as much as 1,000th of a millimeter, they would deem it an act of war, a typical threat from North Korea. And so we can expect them to use this parliamentary session to formalize a boundary of sorts, that it will be further south of the current limits, but it's unlikely that they will give specifics during the session itself. In all likelihood, they will announce some sort of change, perhaps work through the formal changes in their own legislative procedures in the parliamentary session, perhaps beyond, and eventually we might discover, perhaps through a stray image in state media or through other means, where they actually are presenting this boundary, or perhaps even they might notify international authorities, but at the moment their engagement certainly appears to be on the lower side.
Now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said the notion of denuclearizing North Korea is a closed issue, drawing sharp criticism from South Korea. What's your take on his remarks?
Obviously, it's really disappointing that such a statement came from one of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And there are 10 Security Council resolutions that have been passed previously to condemning North Korea's illicit development of nuclear weapons. And then therefore, accordingly, North Korea was sanctioned by the United Nations. All these sanctions resolutions have been agreed to by Russia. So in fact, Sergei Lavrov himself supported passing sanctions measures against North Korea. And we know that North Korea didn't give up its nuclear capability. In fact, it's actually making it more lethal than before. In that sense, it represents a much larger threat to the international peace than ever before. And Russia is giving up its responsibility as a permanent member of the Security Council by announcing that the sanctions against North Korea is a close matter. So what Russia is doing right now is putting priority on its national goals in this part of the world. I think Russia is trying to empower North Korea to be more of a troublemaker, and their ultimate goal is to distract the United States away from Europe, where they are engaging in war against Ukraine. So in that sense, I think it's Russia's way of expanding conflict around the world, spreading conflict around the world. And I think this is the reason why I think there should be a reform of the United Nations, and that Russia should be held accountable for these irresponsible actions.
Meanwhile, IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi has said the international community must recognize that North Korea has nuclear weapons and pursue dialogue accordingly. What's your perspective on this, and how do you assess the impact of his remarks?
Yeah. So Rafael Grossi's perspective essentially was that, well, the way he put it, North Korea has already had weapons since 2006, nuclear weapons since 2006, making it a de facto weapon possessor state. Those were his words. And so what his logic was, has not recognizing this led to any improvements? Has it improved dialogue in any way? He argues that it essentially limits the options if people take absolute stances and say, we will not accept that North Korea has nuclear weapons already. So he's calling for a new approach that takes into account that North Korea already has conducted these tests, that it already has the capabilities. To some extent, this reflects a long-standing debate among academics, among observers, among many countries, saying if we do not, in terms of do we recognize the reality that North Korea already has these capabilities, does that mean recognizing it as being allowed to possess these weapons? And I think those are essentially the two stances where we come from, where some say as long as we say it cannot be seen as a state possessing nuclear weapons, we can't proceed with dialogue. But at the same time, countries like South Korea, the U.S., many others would say it is not acceptable for North Korea to possess nuclear weapons. And so we can expect this dialogue to continue, this debate to continue for a while. But frankly, North Korea has declared its status as a nuclear power is irreversible, while other countries will not accept that as a matter of policy. So it's unlikely that it'll change anything in the near future.
As Shreyas pointed out, this issue will likely keep popping up and will continue for a very long time. But so it's no secret that North Korea can deliver nuclear weapons. Why is it such a critical matter for the world, the official recognition of North Korea as a nuclear state? Why is it such a crucial issue for the world?
Well, clearly because being a nuclear state implies there's a legal status for that. So there are 5 official nuclear states right now, which happen to also be the permanent members of the Security Council. We're talking about United States, China, Russia, United Kingdom, and France. So these are the states that are allowed to possess nuclear weapons. And then, their employment of those weapons by the official nuclear states, actually there are conditions on that. So we can, there's no time to discuss this, but essentially these official nuclear states, even though they are allowed to keep nuclear weapons, they're going to abide by certain conditions to ensure that they're not going to use nuclear weapons at all. So outside these 5 nuclear states, there are so-called 3 unofficial nuclear states. These are India, Pakistan, and Israel, even though Israel doesn't acknowledge that they have nuclear weapons. So, and then even though these are unofficial nuclear states, there are no sanctions against these states. That's why we call them unofficial nuclear states. The reason why the sanction comes up is because right now in the international community and by the international law, there are measures to apply automatic sanctions against states that develop nuclear weapons outside its 5 official nuclear states. Against India and Pakistan and Israel, India and Pakistan, there are sanctions against these countries when they declare nuclear status, but then those measures were removed later on for political reasons. Israel, this is the reason why Israel doesn't declare itself as a nuclear state. They are just happy to have nuclear deterrence against its opponents. So what North Korea is trying to aiming at right now is because what they need is not an official recognition of a country as a nuclear state, because even North Korea understand this is a very high bar. They want the removal of sanctions, even though North Koreans claim that they need sanctions lifting because people are suffering. That's not the true reason why they're asking for the sanctions removal. They're asking for sanctions removal because the current sanctions are in place because North Korea has developed nuclear weapons. So by removing them, North Korea is going to consider that tantamount to recognizing North Korea as an unofficial nuclear state. So once you are an unofficial nuclear state, you can conduct the business as a country normally without having sanctions against it. And that's exactly what North Korea wants. And once that status is acknowledged, then they're going to accrue further benefits. North Korea is going to have a seat on the table when it comes to major affairs that affects not just North Korea itself, but the region as well. So, and also there will be no sanctions against North Korea for its political operation against their own people, human rights violations, and so forth. So North Korea thinks that by achieving this nuclear state status, whether it's official or unofficial, doesn't matter to them. As long as the sanctions are removed against them, North Korea will be able to normalize itself in the eyes of the international community while keeping its outdated and violent regime still in power. So that's the reason why they are so obsessed with this recognition.
Now, before we let you go, we are a little pressured on time. North Korea has strongly denounced Israel for its attack on the Hezbollah militants, calling it a large-scale massacre of civilians. What is Pyongyang's underlying intent here?
So there are two reasons behind this. One is the legacy reason. What I mean by this is that North Korea, before Kim Jong-un came to power, has been a long time aligned with so-called the Third World and the independence movements. And the independence doesn't mean it's against colonialism. It's about so-called imperialism. From that angle, Israel represents Western imperialism in the Middle East. So North Korea was aligning itself with terrorist groups and other nationalistic groups in the Middle East. They supported terrorist groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah before. So essentially, they're continuing with that legacy. And second reason is because North Korea wants a growing emergence of an anti-American, anti-Western front around the world. And they see Hamas and Hezbollah as potential allies in the struggle against the United States. So this is the reason why North Korea is essentially expressing support for these groups in the Middle East.
All right, we'll leave it there tonight. Thank you, as always, Dr. Ko, for being here with us.
My pleasure.
And many thanks to you as well, Sherries, for your perspectives.
Thank you.
And that's all from our team here today. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with more same time on Friday. Have a great weekend. Have a great holiday, rather.